Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Juno Temple, the star of The Offer on Paramount Plus and an Emmy nominee last year for Ted Lasso, season 2 of which you can stream right now on Apple TV Plus. Juno, thank you so much for doing this. I know, obviously, making of The Godfather, people involved with the movie are some of the most famous people in the history of Hollywood, but a lot of people maybe never heard of Bettye McCart. I certainly didn't. To my own, I feel like I should have, because she obviously had such a huge part of, you know, the making of the film and working with Al Ruddy and stuff. When you were, you know, first approached for this, and I guess where did you start when you were trying to figure out like both the character and then also researching her real life, I guess?
Yeah. Like you, I also didn't know about Bettye McCart. And when I was first approached about this project, I also didn't know a lot about the extraordinary complications that were put in front of these, as you said, movie moguls that ended up making one of the greatest films of all time, The Godfather. So it was something that from all angles I was kind of gobsmacked by. And another thing was that when I first started to, think about figuring out who Bettye McCart was, if you type her into Google, there is not a lot of information about her, which in this day and age, I have such respect for. I think it's kind of an incredible thing to actually have remained, that sort of private of a person. And I suppose in a weird way, that might also be why we don't know so much about her, because it's something that maybe meant quite a lot to her. And it kind of left an extraordinary door open for me to sort of create a character with a lot of guidance of, and Dexter Fletcher, who did the first 2 episodes with all of us, and who we started rehearsals with. Initially, we had a couple of weeks, I think it was, rehearsals. And I remember it was quite a quick turnaround. I think I signed the contract on a Friday and started rehearsals on a Monday. And Dexter called me saying, so on Monday, we're going to do a kind of character history. And I was like, cool. Okay, what do you mean? And he was like, I'm just going to ask everyone, no pressure, just very kind of, low key to sort of, I want to know the history of your characters up until the moment where you met Al Ruddy. I was like, cool, great. And then, it was like, oh my gosh, wow, I have to completely, kind of wing this with what I've got in these scripts so far, which I had the information that she was originally from Oklahoma, and that, she was also grew up with a single mom that loved taking her to the movies. And I got to tell you, it was one of the greatest experiences of the beginning of a job ever, because actually it really meant that the research I got to do took me down such extraordinary wormholes of trying to figure out how this amazing woman would have ended up in Los Angeles, right? And so I ended up researching all these different movies that would have been shot around the time when she was in her early 20s and could have been potentially working at a steakhouse in Oklahoma, and how one of the characters from this Paul Newman movie that did film close to Oklahoma around then, actually one of the essays was from Oklahoma and could have ended up in the steakhouse kind of talking with Bettye, and they ended up becoming pen pals. And then the craziest thing is that this actor, I discovered, I don't have all my research with me, unfortunately, it's in Los Angeles, but he actually was friends with the guy Bernie who did Hogan's Heroes with Al Ruddy. And I was like, oh my God, I've managed to figure it out. I figured out some kind of vortex in which Bettye McCart got to Los Angeles. And then, from there, it was just quite exciting. And whether it was, if there was any truth to it or not, it felt amazing to just go down this kind of extraordinary wormhole of all the films that would have been shot around then, and what would have inspired people to want to go to Hollywood and make movies, right? And create that passion that I think, Bettye very much shows in the show, along with Al and Francis and Bob Evans, and all these people, even down to like the cast in the movie, like Al Pacino questioning whether he's good enough for The Godfather, and then I think it was it was an honor to create this character. And then Nikki Toscano, who is somebody, just such a huge inspiration for me in playing Bettye McCart, because she is a woman in Hollywood that handles herself with such grace and such intelligence, and yet such fiery passion. And she was also somebody that I really turned to ask questions about Bettye. And yeah, her guidance was kind of everything throughout the whole show for me. And her dear friend Russell Rothberg, who are two of the main writers on the show, were big inspiration for me for the relationship between Bettye and Al, because it's a really special friendship. And I think, you know, getting to play a woman in that time, which, you know, Hollywood was a very, very, very masculine oriented world, and to have a boss that really believed in Bettye was something that I'm really proud of putting out into the universe. And I couldn't have asked for a better boss. Miles was just such a brilliant actor, man, and human to work with. Yeah. And
No,
our
that's
first
great.
day of everyone presenting these characters on these Monday of rehearsals was jaw-dropping, because you forgot that Francis Ford Coppola was someone you already knew, you know, maybe a lot about, maybe a little about, but you knew his name. And, you know, Dan Fogler delivering his version of Francis's past and up to meeting Al, all these people creating these, you know, these stories was such an amazing way to start this whole process.
Yeah, it's fun to, I mean, as a viewer, it's really great to watch too, obviously, right? Because you got, like, they're not, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, like, a specific part was, like, you know, the show doesn't recreate The Godfather, obviously, right? It's not like a, you know, it's not like like, you're not like this, they're not showing scenes of The Godfather, right, per se. But like, one of the things, like, I'm struck by, and I watched it again this morning, is the first day or first shot, a scene we see Justin Chambers as Marlon Brando, and he does like that in transformation into Don Corleone, and the camera doesn't really show him, but it's mostly relying on you guys in sitting there, like, to respond in a way that is like the audience would be like, oh yeah, he's got it. And I just found that great. And there's a shot of you as Bettye, like, obviously, like, and you just you're just wrapped in awe. And I was like, oh, it's such a great moment for the viewer, because we know that Bettye is like no nonsense, and you could totally believe in her, and you really sell it, and your performance helps sell like that, his performance, you know what I mean? And I guess, can you talk about like that? Like, I just found that really fascinating. I think that happens a lot, especially with Bettye, because you're like having to watch The Godfather or do these different things. And I found that really, where you're not even saying anything maybe, but you really you're showing that awe, and it really helps the audience, like, kind of, you know, suspend disbelief or whatever, that we're watching, you know, like they were watching the real thing. I just found that really great.
I really appreciate that. And I think I some of it, I think I can't take full credit for. I think sometimes I was genuinely in awe. And I think, you know, that day, I'll never forget it. It was like this wild moment of, you know, getting to kind of go and imagine what it would be like to go to Marlon Brando's living room. And I am, as Juno Temple, and have been for a long time, a massive Brando fan. And I was like a little girl that day. I kind of lost my shit. I was completely mesmerized by Justin and what he was doing, and how he emulated this kind of power. He didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't have to, there was this kind of this stillness and this sexuality and this kind of ease in which he carried himself, and comfortability in the space that felt so like being around Brando. And you know, it was a day that I was genuinely like a little girl fan. And actually it led to the fact that then after that day, the scene that happens at the wrap party, which I don't know, I don't know how many episodes are out, or if I'm allowed to talk about it yet.
Well, I think I've seen all of the episodes, so, but I think this week was episode 8, and then 9 and 10. So we're closing in, but it's not a spoiler that the movie wrapped. I think you're probably safe to say we know The Godfather got made.
I get another interaction
yes.
with Brando because of that day,
yes.
Literally because of how thrown I was around that performance, and that kind of idea of being able to sit in Brando's living room. And, you know, especially because Betty's sort of hiding in the lobby initially, and then he notices and invites her in. And I think, you know, there's something that Bettye actually said, which is also something that happens in the show. It's a line that is used later, where she talks about believing in the disillusion of actors. And I think that's such an extraordinary way of describing what we do, and such an incredible insight from an outside perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And once I was told that quite early on, and it was something that really played into how I reacted as Bettye to the actual filming of what was happening with The Godfather.
Yeah, that's awesome. It really does come through, I think, in the performance, and it does help make the show like even more entertaining. You mentioned Miles before, obviously playing already, and like I love you as a performer too, because I think you're a great. You seem like you're a great listener as an actor. I feel like you're really like paying attention to like what the people are doing, and I'm sure you are like that in real life, certainly as well. But I'm like, can you talk about like that? I just found that like I had not seen Miles in that kind of capacity before, and I think his scenes with you are really great. And I guess like, can you talk a little more about like that relationship you guys have, and like you said, a different kind of flavor, certainly. Like I'm sure, you know, there's a million different ways that relationship could have gone, and you know, all these different things, but keeping them as friends and colleagues is really key, obviously, and like real, like based on reality. But I just found that really great, and I'd love for you to talk more about that.
And also, it was something that to me felt very powerful, because ultimately they are the two people that know more information than most of the people around them from all different aspects of the making of The Godfather. And they are two people that cannot talk about certain things with anybody else, right? So there is a friendship there, and an understanding, and a sort of a safety network in a sense too, of trust that is not your average kind of you know, boss and secretary relationship, but one that also I think immediately gains Bettye respect from Ruddy, because she's up for going down that rabbit hole with him. And not only is she up for it, she's actually going to prove that she could probably dig the rabbit hole even deeper. You know, and I think the thing that was so magic with Miles is that he was so nurturing with me as an actor, because I was nervous. I joined on quite late in the game, and you know, it was such an extraordinary project in general, just as a learning perspective, but then also to help it come to life and to tell it in a way where, yeah, we're not making The Godfather, we're telling the story of how hard from this producer's experience it was to get this movie made, and how passion ultimately and fighting for things to be how you know they need to be really does pay off. And Miles is somebody that he believes that through and through, and he's somebody that works really hard. And we talked a lot about these scenes, but also we ended up becoming really great friends. So we laughed, and we had, you know, that chemistry of being friends was something that it wasn't fake. And I think acting is all about reacting. In my opinion, I think if you're not paying attention to what your co-star is doing, then you're not in the scene at all. Right. And I think, God, I got lucky in the offer with every single person I got to interact with, whether it was just for a day or whether it was for the whole 8 months of shooting. You know, people were so transformative that you'd be doing these incredibly in-depth scenes, and suddenly you'd look up and you'd realize, oh my God, but that's the set of The Godfather. And you wouldn't have even noticed yet, you know? And so I'm talking about from all departments as well, these creators that were reimagining scenes that we know well from The Godfather, but they're happening in the background whilst there's a panic about a restaurant owner not wanting the restaurant to be used anymore, you know, and then meanwhile you've got Al Pacino about to do an extraordinary scene, and these kind of, yeah, these pinch yourself moments that were so, I'll never forget them. It was a once in a lifetime experience, truly.
Yeah, I've seen. I read other interviews with you. I know you got. I think your father, you said, had showed you The Godfather when you were like 14 or 15. So I know you've probably seen it a million times, like I have, and like millions of other people have. It's one of the most popular movies of all time. How much, having done this and like learned so much about it, how is your, not opinion maybe, but how has your thoughts on the movie changed or been affected by like having this in-depth like knowledge of how it was made? I guess has it changed or made you appreciate it more or whatever?
Oh, I mean, I watched it throughout shooting as well. I want it because of when, you know, when you're learning things, like for example, you know, the scene where James Caan actually beats up I've forgotten the character's name in the movie now, but that actual scene and the fact that happened for real in reaction to what a prick that actor was in real life. It was like rewatching it, you're blown away when you now see that scene and you're like, oh no, that's not fake. That is actually happening for real. And for me, moments like that, I was blown away by, and that's why I kept checking in with the film throughout shooting. And then going to Sicily and knowing how tiny that little splinter crew was and how that almost didn't happen, but how vital and how right Coppola was in that decision to go to Sicily, right? And that Al Pacino almost didn't make it into the movie. And now that we're talking about Al Pacino and yeah, the process of Marlon Brando and him finding the stray cat, and how that, these tidbits make you realize how much I love my job. I love my job so much because of the risks people take and what wonder they can leave behind.
Yeah.
So I think it just made me appreciate The Godfather more, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I mean, as a viewer too, I'm like, oh man, I just love the movie so much. It's just it's a great movie. And like, yeah, like the little stories and stuff. Obviously you have Ted Lasso as well. You're an Emmy nominee last year for it. Season 2 is now this year's Emmy cycle. And I think you're shooting season 3 now. So I doubt you could say very much anything spoiler wise, but I guess I just like broadly, I know season 2 is such I thought a breakout season for Keeley. Like a lot of people like really, I think, responded to her your performance and her character arc and stuff. Coming off of that into season 3, I mean, how excited were you to go back to playing her and like, that kind of thing?
I mean, she's like a dear friend at this point, I mean, she got me through lockdown. Like, what a character to get to play in a time when, I don't know, the world felt like it was potentially coming to an end, and she was somebody that definitely helped me be a lot kinder to myself than I can be on a daily basis. And so I think getting to come back and play her was something from season 1 into season 2, which it was the first time I've actually ever gotten the opportunity to come back and play a character, unless it's been the occasional reshoot of something or but I've never actually done a continuous character on a TV show. And my God, I didn't know I was going to love it as much. I didn't know I was going to miss her, so getting to come and do it again now in season 3 is something that feels like a kind of, for lack of a better expression, a kind of home, and I think especially with my castmates on it, because we're such a tight knit group of people, we're such a supportive, nurturing group of people, that it also feels like a safe place to come back to as well. And I think, like you said, what an amazing journey Keeley gets to go on and throughout season 2. And it's all these other characters as well. You have Nate, you have Rebecca, you have Jamie, you have all these, all these big transitions, and also all the discussions about therapy and mental health and all these like kind of, really important and brilliant changes and lives that are happening in this show. So I think coming back and doing season 3 just feels exciting, because it's kind of like the most real life job I've ever had, where you're learning about your character as you're shooting it, it's and because we get scripts not way ahead of time, and so you're learning things in a way that you're so in the moment, and I think that's quite an exciting way to do it, especially on a show that is so about being human.
Right. And not to compare, I'm not going to compare Ted Lasso to The Godfather. Having said that, I do think that I will compare it slightly, but I would say here's what I was thinking.
That's a good opening sentence.
Here's what I was thinking about it, because I was like, oh, obviously The Godfather, and we see that in like the later episodes and stuff. It was like Monoculture, right? It was a humongous hit, like a huge hit. It played for months, wins Academy Awards, all these different things. Ted Lasso, obviously, again, not The Godfather, but I do think the second season was like incredibly popular and like became a thing that like everybody had some awareness of, right? Like there was a big reach in that second season, and I obviously became very popular, and like all these different things. I can, like, as you guys as actors, having been through it from the first season when you had no idea how people are going to respond probably, to like the second season, I mean, and like you said, you all seem like you're really close friends. I see that on like the award shows and stuff. Do you guys like, has your thoughts on it changed, or has your feelings about the show or the group changed at all coming off of that like broad, cultural success, I guess?
I don't think our feelings or thoughts have changed about the show, because I think from the get-go we with our kind of fearless leader being Jason and his teammates that were creating this world, Brendan Hunt and Joe Kelly and Bill Lawrence, and then this unbelievable team of writers. I think, from the get-go, we definitely all believed that it was a show that had a real heart. And I think at its core, that's never going to change with Ted Lasso. And I think you never know if something's going to be a hit or not. And as an actor, I think you shouldn't really think about it like that. I don't know if I ever could. I just want to make sure that I'm the best co-star I can be to my co-stars, right? And say the words that are so brilliantly written in the right way. And but I think that there's a certain element of it that's been kind of wild, in the sense that watching the show and not being in all the scenes and being a fan of the show out of shooting it, and then having the world enjoy it also, and people saying to you, oh my god, I love Ted Lasso, I love this, and as an actor in the show you get to be like, me too, and how about that moment with this character and that moment, I was crying at that scene. And so you're almost like, it feels like this kind of weird life imitating art situation of being as much of a fan of the show as fans are, as well as being a part of it. And I don't think that's changed, and I hope that doesn't change. I think that there's also an element, when awards and things get sort of become a part of a show, there's a kind of an element of wanting to make sure you still deliver and you still bring what the show brought initially, and you don't want to disappoint the fans, and because suddenly it feels like, oh, you're aware that people are watching it, but then you have to forget about that, and you have to exist in your character and just, I don't know, keep breathing the life that you get for them, and the time that you get to play them, because it's a special, I don't know, it's an interesting one with it being a hit, and how it hasn't, I don't think it's changed any of us in a way that I would say is negative at all. I'm just stoked that it's opened doors for certain people that hadn't been open before, me included. I'm not sure the offer would have come into my world, that was something that I remember getting the phone call of being offered the offer, and I was like, what do you mean? Oh my god. And that's something that I think with a lot of my co-stars on Ted Lasso, who are such extraordinary humans and such brilliant actors and comedians and such humble, brilliant people, and getting to see them kind of get the work that they deserve is something really special.
Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. We have to wrap up here. But Juno Temple, it's such a great talking to you. Star of The Offer on Paramount Plus, obviously an Emmy nominee last year for Ted Lasso, and season 2 is streaming on Apple TV Plus. Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you.